The logical and psychological equipment must be followed up by practical discipline, without which the Bodhisattva could not be more than an idealistic philosopher. Quote, as all the sacred doctrines leave no room for option and doubt as to the import of self-discipline, let the Bodhisattva retire into a quiet and solitary place and reflect within himself by means of the intelligence which lies in his inmost mind, not to be led by anybody else. Then he will be able to free himself from views based upon discrimination, and by degrees advance toward the state of Tathagatahood. Close quote. This not depending upon another is emphasized not only in Mahayana literature, but in the Agamas or Nikayas, for Buddhism is emphatically the doctrine of enlightenment which is to be realized within oneself. So it is urged for the Bodhisattva who wishes to penetrate behind the screen of contrasts and dialectics that he should rid himself of all the hindrances that may arise from noisy confusion, from heaviness of mind, and from sleepiness, and also that he should assiduously engage in disciplining himself throughout the night, not at all mindful of the philosophies of the other schools. Can the Bodhisattva, however, reach his goal by his own effort and without any outside assistance? Is there really no, quote, other power that will come to his help? Here we have one of the special features of Mahayana Buddhism distinguishing itself from the Hinayana. The Lankavatara calls it the adhisthana of all the Buddhas, which issues from their pranidhana, or vow. Without this adhisthana on the part of the Buddha, the Bodhisattva, with all his assiduity and penetrating insight, may be incapable of realizing the highest truth in himself, and may not finally be taken up among the community of the Buddhas of the past, present, and future. It is the power emanating from the will of the Buddha, whose loving heart embraces the whole universe, that is added to that of a Bodhisattva, to sustain him, to encourage him, and finally to carry him over to a state of self-realization. Not only in the present sutra, but in other Mahayana sutras, we frequently come across this sentence, quote, through the power of the Buddha, a Bodhisattva rose from his seat and asked thus of the Buddha, or preached thus. This is a form of authorization, but in the case of adhisthana, it is more than that, for here the Buddha's power sustains the Bodhisattva throughout his long laborious career of discipleship. Quote, and again, O Mahamate, sustained in two ways by the power or adhisthana of the Buddhas, the Bodhisattva falls down at their feet and asks them to settle controversial points for him. What are the two ways? The one is the power by which the Bodhisattva is made to attain states of mental tranquilization, and the other is that by which the Buddha personally appears before the Bodhisattva and anoints him with his own hands. It is thus due to the power of the Buddha that the Bodhisattva at the first stage attains the samadhi known as the light of the Mahayana, and that, having attained this samadhi, the Bodhisattva finds himself now blessed by the personal presence of all the Buddhas from the 10 quarters, who will, with their own body and speech, accumulate their power upon him. It is like the case of the Bodhisattva Vajragarpa and others who are furnished with all these meritorious attributes. O Mahamate, in this wise the Bodhisattva at the first stage is sustained by the power of the Buddhas in his attainment of the states of tranquilization. In virtue of a stock of merit accumulated for hundreds of thousands of kalpas, he will in succession ascend the stages and, qualifying himself with the virtues of perfect control, reach the stage of bodhisattvahood called Dharma Megha, cloud of the law. Seating himself on a throne in the palace of the Great Lotus, he is surrounded by bodhisattvas like himself, and wears a tiara adorned and embellished with all kinds of jewels. The Buddhas will now come from all the 10 quarters of the universe, shining like the brilliant full moon, with yellowish golden champaka-like rays, and with their lotus-like hands anoint the forehead of the Bodhisattva seated on the throne in the Lotus Palace. He is like the crown prince of a great sovereign, who, being thus anointed by the Buddhas personally with their own hands, assumes full power. This Bodhisattva and such others are said to be sustained, thus hand-anointed by the power of the Buddhas. These are the 2 ways in which the Bodhisattva is sustained by the power of the Buddha, and when he is thus sustained, he will see all the Buddhas face to face. In no other way are the Tathagatas, Arhats, the fully enlightened ones, to be seen. And again, O Mahamate, whatever the Bodhisattva accomplishes in the way of samadhi, psychic attainments, or preaching, is thus done by being sustained in 2 ways by the power of the Buddhas. If the Bodhisattva could at all preach intelligently without being sustained by the power of the Buddhas, the ignorant would also preach intelligently. Why? It all depends upon whether or not one is sustained by the Buddha's power. If it is sustained by the entrance of the Tathagata into it, the whole universe, with its grasses, shrubs, trees, and even mountains, and also with its musical instruments of all kinds, utensils, towns, dwellings, palaces, and seats, all will make music. How much more conscious beings? The deaf, blind, and mute will be emancipated from their defects. Such is the power of the Tathagata, so distinctive and so full of great virtues. Mahamati asked, why do the Tathagatas sustain the Bodhisattva by their power when he abides in the stage of tranquilization, as well as when he is at the superior stage? Said the Blessed One, it is to keep him away from the evil one and from evil passions. It is to let him not fall into the dhyana and stage of the Shravakas, but to make him attain to the self-realization of the Tathagata stage and grow in the virtues already acquired by him. For this reason, the Bodhisattva is sustained by the power of all the Tathagatas. O Mahamate, if he is not thus sustained, he may fall into the way of thinking as cherished by bad philosophers, Shravakas, and the evil one, and will not be enlightened in the supreme enlightenment. For this reason, the Bodhisattva is favored by the Tathagatas, who are Arhats and fully enlightened ones. Close quote.